The world is indeed a strange and sometimes incomprehensible place. For here alongside man dwells a carnival of inhuman denizens, who from time to time ascend from the shadows, dark warrens, and the midnight mists, and make themselves known to us but briefly. The ancient saying is true: here be monsters. Blackwater Media is proud to present Darkfall Anthology 4. The final shipment of artifacts had been problematic. That notwithstanding, the Langstrom Institute had authorized the acquisition to be made no matter what. The National Academy of Sciences was now involved, and so was the Pentagon Special Sciences Division. You see, I'm known and respected as an anthropologist and an expert in folklore and mythology. Whether it's the obscure lore of the Arapaho of Colorado and Wyoming, or the Bedouin tribes of Midwest Asia, I'm the one people come to when they want answers and results. Now $50 million was in play on whether or not I could deliver. On that final night, before the meeting, before the flight to DC, time had gotten away from me. It was going on 2 a.m. I continued to pore over volumes of related to the current subject of my efforts. Few other people in the world could so quickly and efficiently translate as they read Greek, Akkadian, even Latin. The most recent source that I could find was Eurasian, writings related to mythological hybrids. Finally, as the clock approached 3 a.m., I'd seen enough. I was certain, as unbelievable as it was to comprehend, the simple truth was, that thing raging in the cage in the large storage room below my office was a griffin. My grandmother grew up in the slums of Prohibition-era Chicago. Her family lived in a small house near the harbor, and one of her earliest memories was of a particularly hot summer when, seeking respite from the heat, she and her sister discovered a seldom used section of a boardwalk near an abandoned warehouse. Every night for several weeks, the two girls would make their way down to the docks and sit together on the edge of the pier as the sun went down. My grandmother vividly, and for a time fondly, recalled the feel of the seaweed between her toes as she and her sister dangled their feet into the murky water. It wasn't until years later that she returned to the pier and found that the warehouse had been demolished. Curious, she made an inquiry with the Department of Planning and Development. Apparently, the warehouse had been owned for a time by the mob, who was using it as a base of operations for local prostitution rackets. It had only been uncovered when an associate began disposing of rival hookers by fitting them with concrete shoes and dumping them into the harbor. Investigating officers had recovered nearly 24 bodies from the waters of a secluded pier nearby. How had the bodies been discovered? A passing fisherman spotted some of the victims' hair floating near the surface of the water, like seaweed. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 or 3 a.m. every night. He would answer, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then after a week or so, it began again. The same exact noise, exact same time. Finally, one day he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He finally said, screw it. He ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. But you know what happened. The screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night, unsure why this was happening. He back dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The call stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day my mother asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the same static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaked out. He back dialed the number again and it said the number was disconnected this time. After that, none of us ever received a call like that again. But it makes you wonder. For the purposes of what I want to say, I'll use the name James. I have for more than 20 years been affiliated with a major university on the West Coast. If I gave more information than that, all the armchair, basement-dwelling internet goblins would pull out their shovels and picks to start digging around to find my true identity. Anyway, I'm a theoretical physicist, and I'll save you the liturgical pain of explaining the totality of the discipline. In essence, I use mathematics to understand how the forces in nature and the universe work. And it is this work that has led me to something truly remarkable. Without question, I could spend a lot of time warbling over the technical elements of what I want to share, but that too comes with risks. Aside from the general public, there are those who serve in, how shall I say it, high positions that would like nothing better than to take control of this work. You see, it all centers around something that I call the chronoscope. A bit dramatic, I know, but hey, being a theoretical physicist also means that I like contraptions with cool sounding names. Shades of H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury. In any event, as the name suggests, and as difficult as it may be for some people to grasp, understand, and believe, it is a technology that permits audio-visual observation of the past. I mean, the actual past, not a movie or a previously recorded event, but real-time observation. Putting it simply, the chronoscope combines digital sensing technology with electromagnetic field distortion calibration. The more intense the field distortion, the further back in time one can observe. The field intensity can be calibrated to a greater or lesser degree to periods of time and geographical locations as have been coded into the computer. For example, you could follow the troop movements and actual engagements of the Carthaginians and Romans during the Punic Wars. You can witness the varied and heated debates of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, or what the horror experienced by enslaved Africans during their tortured journey through the Middle Passage. Or what of the observation of the natural wonder of a primordial earth where the creatures of the Mesozoic held dominion over the world? Okay, so I think you get the point. At least I hope that you do. As I continue to refine the process, I also continue to record and catalog what I consider to be significant historical milestones in world history, some of which I can assure you will cause a great many people reason to pause for careful contemplation. For there are things, places, people, and events that I have seen that you know not of. And there is much in myth that I have seen to be fact. Similarly, there is much cast in man's belief for which there is absolutely no basis whatsoever. But these things will be revealed by and by, for I've come to understand that all truth in its varied manifestations will become known. It's only a matter of time. A woman in Texas bought a real haunted zombie voodoo doll on eBay in 2004. She thought it was just for display purposes. She took it out of the small coffin and displayed it. It was, she said later on, a real big mistake. The doll attacked her many times. She had cuts, bruises, and had been gashed open on her leg. After being attacked and knowing the doll was haunted, without a second thought, she left it on display. One evening, she was in her bedroom reading a book when she heard a tapping noise coming from the downstairs area. She was curious to find what was causing the noise. She opened the door, only to find the voodoo doll on the floor. This continued for several weeks. She would hear a tapping noise and find the doll on the ground. One night, she went to her porch and felt a stinging. She looked down and saw 3 claw marks on her ankle. Every night she was scratched, bit, and her leg was so gashed up that she had to go to the hospital. She put the doll back in its little coffin and shoved it into the basement, praying it would stay away from her. For weeks, she heard evil laughs and giggles, but she wouldn't dare open the basement door. The doll couldn't physically attack her, but it began to haunt her in her dreams. She tried to burn the doll, but it wouldn't work. She tried to cut it up, but the scissors broke as well as the knife she used. So she buried it in the cemetery, but it was too shallow and it appeared all dirty on her doorstep. She resold it on eBay, and the buyer said it disappeared from her home. The woman found the doll on her doorstep, and she had to send it back to the buyer. The buyer complained that it disappeared again. So when the woman found it on her doorstep again, she wrapped it up securely and then sent it back once again. After that, the buyer said the box was empty. Then the woman found the doll at her door again. 2 years later, the woman was finally able to get rid of the doll. She had a priest bless the doll, which made it calm down. Right now, the doll is blessed in its coffin and kept away in the basement. She was told to never remove it from that box again. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. We bought an old house, my girlfriend and I. She's in charge of the new construction and is making plans for converting the kitchen into the master bedroom, for instance. And I'm stuck removing wallpaper all day. The previous owner papered every wall and ceiling. Removing it's brutal, but somehow satisfying. The best feeling is getting that long peel similar to your skin when you're peeling from a sunburn. I don't know about you, but I kind of make a game of peeling the paper, on the hunt for the longest piece before it rips. Under a corner section of paper in every room is a person's name and date. I thought this was damn curious. And that curiosity got the best of me one night when I Googled one of the names and discovered the person was actually a missing person. God damn. Not only that, the missing date matched the date under the damn wallpaper. Next day, I made a list of all the names and dates. Sure enough, each name was for a missing person with dates to match. Of course, you know we notified the police, who naturally sent out the crime scene team. I overheard one of the techs say, "Yeah, it's human." Human? What do you mean it's human? That's when he asked me about the material that I'd removed from the walls already. He told me that it wasn't actually wallpaper. It was human flesh. Wendigos are real, and the one that's been sighted all over Texas is the same one I saw a couple of times. This last time, though, I saw a clearly detailed body, and I'll never forget its huge black eyes. I've heard its mimicry of dying animals, and even my old friend calling for help from the dark forest, even though I knew they weren't home because I dropped them off at their house. It's tried to lure me into the woods, but I know its games. In the winter of 2016, twice in 2018, around the fall months, and again in 2019. On January 12th, 2019, it was a relatively cold night with slight misting. I circled my whole town because it's pretty small. Coming home, I walked by this large patch of woods nobody goes in except me because I'm the adventurous type. As I came up to it with the woods on my right, and an old metal building with two small white houses beside it to my left, I saw an 8 to 10 foot pale figure briskly walk across the dirt road from one of the houses to the woods about 40 feet in front of me. I saw it clearly, but ignored it and continued walking forward. Then, this feeling of heaviness and dread washed over me as if I were being watched. I took out my phone and switched on the light app and kept it aimed at the woods. I turned my head back and forth from the houses to the woods as I walked. For about the 5th time, I looked back at the woods, and there it was. Holy shit. It was on all fours, crouching over, but was easily still 5 feet tall at the shoulder. Now, I'm around 6 feet, by the way, so that's how I could estimate its height. It was again only about 40 feet away. It had bleached white skin, a bald head, huge black eyes, a quasi-human face and body, except it looked extremely emaciated, and its arms were like super long twigs. It started swaying its body back and forth like a mantis. That's when I ran as fast as I could. I mean, I hauled ass. I only looked back after clearing about 2 blocks. It didn't chase me, but I got the distinct impression that it was upset that I interrupted its spying session on the people sleeping in those houses. Maybe you've heard of Wendigos, maybe not. One thing I can tell you, it's the last thing in the world you want to mess with. In June of 1972, a woman appeared in Cedars-Sinai Hospital in nothing but a white, blood-covered gown. Now, this in itself shouldn't be too surprising, as people often have accidents nearby and come to the nearest hospital for medical attention. But there were 2 things that caused people who saw her to vomit and flee in terror. The first being that she wasn't exactly human. She resembled something close to a mannequin, but had the dexterity and fluidity of a normal human being. Her face was as flawless as a mannequin, devoid of eyebrows and smeared in makeup. There was a kitten clamped in her jaw so unnaturally tight that no teeth could be seen, and the blood was still squirting out over her gown and onto the floor. She then pulled it out of her mouth, tossed it aside, and collapsed. From the moment she stepped through the entrance to when she was taken to a hospital room and cleaned up before being prepped for sedation, she was completely calm, expressionless, and motionless. The doctors thought it best to restrain her until the authorities could arrive, and she did not protest. They were unable to get any kind of response from her, and most staff members felt too uncomfortable to look directly at her for more than a few seconds. But the second the staff tried to sedate her, she fought back with extreme force. 2 members of staff had to hold her down as her body rose up on the bed with the same blank expression. She turned her emotionless eyes towards the male doctor and did something unusual. She smiled. As she did, the female doctor screamed and let go out of shock. In the woman's mouth were not human teeth, but long, sharp spikes. Too long for her mouth to close fully without causing any damage. The male doctor stared back at her for a moment before asking, "What in the hell are you?" She cracked her neck down to her shoulder to observe him, still smiling. There was a long pause. The security had been alerted and could be heard coming down the hallway. As he heard them approach, she darted forward, sinking her teeth into the front of his throat, ripping out his jugular, and letting him fall to the floor, gasping for air as he choked on his own blood. She stood up and leaned over him, her face coming dangerously close to his as the life faded from his eyes. She leaned closer and whispered in his ear, "I am God." The doctor's eyes filled with fear as he watched her calmly walk away to greet the security men. His last ever sight would be watching her feast on them one by one. The female doctor who survived the incident named her the Undead. After that day, she was never seen again. Or it may be that those who were unfortunate enough to encounter her never lived to report it. I've always been fascinated by tales of cryptid lake or water monsters, though I've never actually seen one myself. But my grandfather, who for the purposes of this story we'll call Bill, and also a rock-solid, no-bullshit man, once recalled a time during World War II when he was serving aboard a ship that was in the English Channel. He noticed a commotion one evening on deck, and when he went to investigate, many crewmen were carrying on. Those who happened to have cameras were eagerly snapping photos, though Bill didn't have a camera. What he claims to have seen was astonishing. A creature was traveling in the water in a perpendicular fashion with the boat. It was moving just slowly enough to frighten the crewmen into thinking that their vessel would collide with the beast. The creature, whose long back broke the water and looked something like a crocodile's, had its head held out of the water as it traveled. Its incredible size was said to even be longer than the vessel itself. My grandfather stared there with his mouth hanging wide open. As he recounted, the vessel and the creature actually did come very close to colliding, but apparently the animal had a clear destination in mind. It simply kept on moving without acknowledging the vessel or looking left or right, luckily for those on board. And it was not seen to submerge. Crew members followed it with their eyes as long as they were able, until it finally disappeared from sight. This couldn't have been a crocodile, first of all not in the English Channel, and certainly not one of any significant size. When I pressed him for a better description, he stubbornly gathered his bearings and stated, "Well, shit, it looked like a dinosaur. That's all there is to it. A goddamn dinosaur, I swear it." And this was especially chilling to me. There are things that exist in this world that defy all reason and logic. Many of these things emerge and move among us only when darkness falls and sweeps across the landscape. From such things, nightmares are born. During the late 1950s, a woman in Texas encountered one such nightmare in the form of a werewolf. On a summer night in 1958, Miss Delbert Gregg was home alone. Her husband was away on a business trip. She moved her bed close to a screen window, hoping to catch some cool breeze from a thunderstorm brewing on the southwestern horizon. She heard a scratching sound from the window shortly after she fell asleep. In a flash of a lightning bolt, she saw a huge, shaggy wolf-like creature clawing at the screen and staring at her with baleful, glowing, slitted eyes. And she saw it bear white fangs. The creature fled from the yard into a clump of bushes, and she leaped from her bed to grab a flashlight. She watched for the animal to come out of the bushes, but after a short time, instead of a great shaggy wolf creature, the figure of an extremely tall man suddenly parted the thick foliage and walked hurriedly down the road, disappearing into the darkness. Her story was later retold in a 1960 issue of Fate magazine. Let the story of this encounter serve as a warning. Werewolves are real, and so too is the evil that spawns them.